Okay, so my name is Jana Rošker. I'm a professor of sinology at the Ljubljana, from the Ljubljana University in Slovenia, and I will tell you something today about the cultural conditionality of Chinese modernization. Is there such a thing, or is that a paradox in itself? Through the lens of the civilizational discourse. So, yeah. I must confess in the very beginning that I have always had severe difficulties working with the term civilization as such, because it represents a necessarily essentialist notion, often defined as a highest cultural grouping of people and the broadest level of cultural identity. People have shored off that which distinguished humans from other species. As we have now seen from this quotation, this is from Huntington, for instance, he defines it as an intrinsically linked to terms which are, in my view, also highly problematic, such as, for instance, the most complex, but at the same time most diffuse notion of cultural identity, which can certainly allow for the inclusion of potentially dangerous nationalist and elitist connotations. Besides, if we refuse the alleged relationship which have been ideologically constructed between Western dominance and progress, imperialism and evolution, development and well-being, and so on, it becomes difficult somehow to maintain the civilizational perspective. And with this critique, I do not stand alone. Many other scholars, for instance, Gerald Delanty, raised in his interview with Johan Arnason, who is one of the Scandinavian pioneers of the multiple modernities discourse, he raised in this interview an objection, and he exposed as the term civilization is a hopelessly corrupted with essentialistic, if not Eurocentric, assumption. Delanty also points to the difficulty to deal through this lens, namely through civilizational lens, with particular histories that cannot be easily understood in terms of civilizations, and argues that this notion could only with difficulty be taken, of course, from the Euro-Asian context. And in his reply to this critique, Arnason then rejects the very term essentialist or essentialism such as being hopelessly overstretched buzzword that should be taken out of circulation. And he also argues its appropriateness as follows. He says, to theorize about social historical formations is to posit different kinds and degrees of continuity and coherence. And this must be discussed in the appropriate specific terms. The anti-essentialist theoretics serves, according to Arnason, to justify a blanket refusal to engage with such issues, with issues then of coherence and unity and continuity and so on. So in this reaction, actually, I cannot but see an elementary misunderstanding of the very term essentialist, which is a notion based upon the belief that every entity has a set of vital attributes that are necessary to its identity and function. In this view, essence makes every entity what it is. It defines it in a way that without it, a particular entity would not be that kind of entity. Any discussion that centers on distinctions in socio-historical formations, as well as the identification of both quantitative and qualitative differences in and of the patterns of continuity, and coherence inherently demands an anti-essentialistic approach. So such attitudes highlight the importance of recognizing the complexities and fluidities of cultures and civilizations, rather than reducing them to some fixed essential characteristics. An essentialist view of civilizations can lead to the idea that one civilization is superior to the others, fostering hierarchies and ethnocentrism. Critics stress the importance of acknowledging cultural diversity and equality. Besides, essentialism leans towards the idea that identities are inherent, neglecting the role of social and individual agency in shaping cultural identities. In such a view of civilizations, their essence has been used for political and ideological purposes, justifying exclusionary policies and promoting ethno-nationalisms. To have a civilization now means to be a member, like Heinrich Roth said, to be a member of a club of distinguished cultures that draw from their own roots and may not be commended by others. Right. So, yeah, on the other hand, we cannot but admit that similar approaches can also be made in regard to the notion of culture, which is, in most views, part and parcel of the notion of civilization. I use the term culture as a category based upon the fact that different human social formations that shape and develop in different temporal and spatial contexts form different cosmologies, linguistic systems, symbolic paradigms, semantic referential frameworks, and axiologies. It is important to see that these are dynamic and changeable. Essentialism often neglects the influence of cultural interactions and hybridizations. In reality, cultures frequently borrow and adapt elements from others, blurring the boundaries of cultural purity. So I see any kind of comparison and mutual interaction of such categories or systems as a process of transculturalization, namely a process that surpasses the orthodox stative formulation of culture and opens up transculturalization. That is a process that surpasses such very essentialistic formulations or understandings of the notion of culture. So, if we open up the possibilities for the formulation, for the constitution also of new transculturally conditioned horizons for the theoretization of such contents without reducing them to separate systems or categories to which they primarily belong, we have already made a big step towards the theory that somehow eliminates the basic relicts of Eurocentrism and Orientalism. So basically, we can define culture as the permeable and absorbent entirety of knowledge, of opinions, of arts and practices shared by a human group. Civilization, on the other hand, is the organized development of one or more cultures within an urban center, conditioned and implemented by an institutional order. It is also a material and physical background, which enables knowledge and experience to be developed to technologies and to economic surplus. which allow for various types of social and political power structures. Although it is of utmost importance to investigate different types of relations between material developments of societies and the structures of underlying economic political power, the elementary paradigms for such investigations lie in the categories of culture, rather than in the ones defining civilization. Such studies have to be guided by structures and organizations of knowledge, ideas, experiences, and practices, and not so much by their material indications or institutional representations. For the latter are only the consequences of, and not the reasons for, the former. Besides, elements of civilizations can be borrowed without significant alternation, but the same cannot be said for cultural elements. To assimilate any cultural aspect into another culture, whether it's political, economic, or social, adjustments are necessary to adapt to the new cultural context. Therefore, culture exhibits greater stability compared to civilization, making it a more reliable category for evaluating the coherent development of societies. Based on this perspective, it's more meaningful to explore questions related to the relationships between the universality and potential cultural specificity of modernization. And now, on this background, I would, in the framework of sinology, continue this general debate with a few words on the multiple modernities theory, which I have already mentioned before. But this is a theory which occurred in the context of the revival of the modernization theories, which emerged by the end of the previous century. In this era of global development, it became evident and, in fact, somehow imperative for modernization discourses to incorporate and assimilate the formerly underestimated cultural variations of social dynamics, which had previously been viewed as hindrances to the modernization of non-Western regions. Now, according to Heiner Rutz, the multiple modernities theory sees different cultural ontologies as constituting persistent core identities of the respective cultures. This is an essentialist view, which emphasizes that different cultures which are furnished with such a core identity do not vanish under the pressure of modernization, but rather leave their mark on it. In order to underpin their theory, the proponents of the theory of multiple modernities refer to Karl Jasper's idea of the axial age, which, as they see it, helps to explain the formation of distinct great civilizations from different axial periods in which the core identities took shape that later defined the various modernities. Interestingly, this is also the quasi-official reading, according to Heiner Rutz, of the axial age thesis in China. So to be an axial age member, we could say, an axial culture now means, as already mentioned, to be a member of a club of distinguished civilizations that draw up from their own, roots and may not be commended by others. But Rutz sees in such an interpretation of the axial age thesis a misuse of Jasper's main idea, which was originally intended to overcome the curse of the claim to uniqueness by what he called boundless or limitless communication. and turned into a tool of a cultural nationalism. So in Roetz's view, the axial age thesis has been made exploitable by the theory of multiple modernization, which has turned it into a tool of a merely explanatory and no longer critical historical sociology. So, for Heiner Rutz, the most important shift of the axial age manifested itself in the discovery and consolidation of human subjectivity and in the establishment of the morally free and autonomous individual. This subjectivity, however, is, according to Rutz, Janus-headed. It has two images, two sides. It can, on the one hand, either lead to empathy and therefore to ethical universalism in his view, or to calculating particularism. In other words, it is the precondition not only for moral, but also for strategic freedom. Because of the latter, the discovery of subjectivity in the axial age could not or did not lead to the society of free and equal individuals, but rather to societies of exploitation and oppression. Now, Rutz does not go further into the question of why, but instead he claims that regarding Chinese modernity, Zhang Zhidong's answer to the challenge of modernity is paradigmatic in its attempt to unleash technical and economic rationality, and at the same time put a curb on political freedom in the name of the Chinese culture. This has led to the hybrid mixture of dictatorship and capitalism, says Rutz, that had Taiwan in its grip during the time of martial law under Chiang Kai-shek and has been flourishing in mainland China after Mao. This hybrid system appears today, according to Rutz, under the name of Chinese modernity. So my own perspective on these questions corresponds to a critical approach when it comes to the idea of multiple modernities. But this view isn't based only on the arguments put forward by Heiner Rutz. In my view, the main flaw of this concept is also that it does not recognize the power relations between different regions and cultures, ignoring the fact that these power dynamics play an important role in shaping what we call different modernities. In a sense, however, Rutz's and my critique are similar because they pursue the same objectives. Rutz's critique is based on the fact that later prominent adaptations of this idea have eliminated, of the idea of axial age, have eliminated one of the crucial elements that motivated Jaspers in the first place to develop his axial age thesis, namely his normative interest. I fully agree that postmodern relativization that underlies the theory of multiple modernities is dangerous precisely because of its complete lack of normativity, which is all the more destructive in light of existing power structures and relations. However, regarding Rutz's view on the Chinese modernization as a hybrid mixture of dictatorship and capitalism, which is at least indirectly affirmed by the multiple modernities theory, I do not completely agree. It has to be noted that such an interpretation of Chinese modernity, namely an interpretation that only relies on the autocratic phase of the double Janus head, has not been unanimously accepted in the modern Chinese theories of modernization, as we can see here from Dirlich's quotation, which is cited in this slide. The multiple modernist theories ignores this whole debate ignores indigenous modernization theories as those that were created by, for instance, by the proponents of the Chinese modern New Confucian intellectual movement, which began in the 70s of the previous century. So the ideology described by Heinrich in this regard, that is modernity as a mixture of autocracy and capitalism, aligns with the ideology of Asian values, which is, in my view, a reactionary and autocratic ideology, which came into life in Singapore and was later happily adopted by the autocratic governments of the People's Republic of China. Both ideologies of this conservative current, namely that is the Asian values theory and the modernity with Chinese characteristics, both were based upon a reductive view of the axial age period as one in which all important civilizations were formed. The normative claim of Jasper's original idea was completely erased in this view. It was projected to the governments of these individual civilizations. These civilizations were seen as stable cultural patterns, which have later led to different paradigms of modernity. However, this interpretation, and this is important in my view, is far from this being a sole perspective within the realm of modern and contemporary Chinese theories of modernization. It is, of course, true that many modern New Confucian scholars, exemplified by figures like Tu Weiming, for instance, who is one of the most prominent and widely recognized scholars of Confucianism in contemporary Western academia, have also embraced this perspective, more or less. They reinforce it by erasing the distinction between traditions and modernity, a dichotomy that historically played a pivotal role in shaping the normative enlightenment-driven concept of modernity. As Heinrich puts it, he says, the tension with tradition is no longer supposed to be constitutive for modernity, but reversely, traditions now in a substantial way define the meaning of being modern. However, there is a large discrepancy between such views and the theoretical foundations of many other scholars who could likewise be seen as belonging to the revival of Confucianism. Here, not only Xu Fuguan and partly also Mo Zhongshan have played an important role, but also, for instance, Li Zihou, who has turned Zhang Zhedong's slogan around and who defined the concept of Ti and Tiong in the modernization discourse in a completely oppositional way, in a very different way. Now, however, we also must be aware of the fact that all these different views of Chinese modernity are based upon different historical interpretations of the Chinese classical tradition, particularly of Confucianism, which is seen as its central pillar. A preliminary differentiation of the constituent elements within various tiers of Confucian teachings and their respective socio-political implications can provide clarity on the frequently debated issue concerning the integration of hierarchy and mobility. Scholars often ask themselves or others why, what are the reasons for this funny, somehow strange combination in Confucianism. In this regard, however, I would not hasten to find a unified paradigm for a thorough explanation of the relation between traditional and modern Confucianism, as for instance in a notion of the alleged meta-Confucian pattern, without considering the historical dimension and the roots of the manifold diversities that can be found in both discourses. Here, we need to consider an important basic differentiation that must be made in any serious evaluation of Confucian thought and its relation to the shaping of modernity in Eastern Asia. So the above-mentioned differentiation in the evolution of Confucianism in Chinese intellectual history is elucidated through various traditional interpretations. According to these perspectives, the first reform occurred in the 1st century, the second in the 12th century, and the third in the 19th and 20th century. So in the first reform, certain legalist elements were incorporated into Confucianism through the interpretations of Xunzi and the Gongyang school. This shift altered the focus from the original moral autonomy of the individual to a more structured and hierarchical social ethics. This transformation laid the groundwork for the Confucian state doctrine, which was institutionalized through the official examination system. And the original moral philosophy was then rejuvenated and transformed in the second reform, influenced by Mencian discourses and the Guliang text during the Neo-Confucianism of the Song and Ming dynasties. Subsequently, it underwent modernization in the third reform, led by the Modern New Confucian movement of the 20th century, a modernization of ideas that was implemented and developed through a dialogue with the Western thought. So, therefore, the problem of a Confucian combination of autocracy and freedom, ossification and flexibility, dogmatism and openness can be explained by the fact that Confucianism cannot be seen as a monolithic and static ideological building, as it is seen in the civilizational theory, but rather as an inherently diversified discourse containing different, partly even mutually contradictory paradigms that have manifested themselves in an ethics of dynamic and multifarious relations and philosophy of diversity on the one hand, and state doctrine or fixed and unquestionable normative ethics on the other. In this context, it is important to see that these two currents are rooted in different classical streams of thought. An indiscriminative and homogeneous view of Confucianism as the institutional basis of a monolithic civilization, even if it is wrapped up in a theory of an alleged meta-Confucian theory or system, can therefore obscure or view of the specific characteristics of Chinese modernization. And here I would like to conclude this presentation, and thank you all for your patient listening.